My apologies for cutting off such great conversation. I think we are all still celebrating in a way the opportunity to get together whenever we can. And Russell Balding said to me earlier how great it is to be in Western Sydney again. And I couldn't agree more. And I think Western Sydney, and just talking to Daniel as well, the Honourable Daniel Mookhey, MLC, Shadow Treasurer, but I'll let David introduce him later, but just saying how pivotal Western Sydney is going to be in this election. 51 days, I think, Daniel, is to go.
23 hours.
Yeah, and 20... And I think nine seats to get a majority, which would be the most outstanding Labor Party result in the country, I think, in 10 years or thereabouts. So a lot to do. And lunch today and dinner tonight, I hear, and on we go. But look, before I go into a little bit of a welcome, of course, I'd love to acknowledge on your behalf the traditional custodians of the land on which we're blessed to meet today. I take this very seriously when I do this and look at the 60,000 years of rich history and ownership of the lands and waterways on which we're blessed to live, work and play. And I think it's really incumbent upon us all to appreciate and understand that history, and we are the beneficiaries of that. So we're on Darug country today. The Barramadigal clan, Barramadigal means the place where the eels lie down. I don't know whether that refers to the rugby league team every year when it comes to the finals and grand final. But that's where I think you'll find the eels got their name. But anyway, on behalf of you all, and it is exactly where they got their name. But if you Google it, you'll see it's a place where the eels lie down. So on behalf of you all, I pay our respects to elders past and present, and those who are emerging, and certainly any First Nations folk in our room today. Look, it's my pleasure to launch and welcome Daniel, of course, but to launch We Mean Business, Business New South Wales' 2023 election campaign. A big year for us in politics. The last 3 years have set a landscape that none of us could ever have imagined, I would have thought. I don't need to go into too much of that in the context of the pandemic, but certainly where we've landed around inflation, interest rates, skills, labour shortages, insurance, and I've already warned Robbo we're going to talk about workers' comp a little bit later. The changing landscape and the industrial relations and some of those things that have got business in this country and certainly in our state really, really scratching their heads to a large degree. So we do mean business. It doesn't matter what size business for Business New South Wales. We represent over 40,000 members, proudly do that, and on a national basis closer to 90,000, but certainly in New South Wales, 40,000, whether a small, micro, big or whatever. The We Mean Business campaign is something very close to our hearts. Some of you might not know that Business New South Wales, formerly the New South Wales Business Chamber, is the second oldest organisation in Australia, and the oldest is Westpac, and I think, and David Harding, correct me if I'm wrong, we're 197 years young this year, and correct?
Personally, but
No, not you personally, no, but 197 years young this year, so getting very close to the 200-year landmark. But we take this very serious, and we take the privileged role we sit in as advocates on behalf of you, our members, to address government and challenge government and test government to stand up and deliver what we believe are the most fundamental outcomes for business to continue to thrive in this state, which has always been, and Daniel, you know this and we've shared this before, the best state to do business in any part of Australia. But we've got to continue to do that by recognising the issues at hand and by being prepared to address those. And I just spoke to Daniel again a moment ago and he said, we actually want to get in the government and do something. And I think that's a very powerful comment. That's no comment on the current government, but I'm just saying it's a very powerful comment from Daniel's aspirational and directional perspective that they do want to do things. And we've got a whole lot of issues we're happy to share with you, as I'm sure you appreciate. And in the context of those, we've just completed a quarterly business survey and also an election survey. The election survey is about 900 of our members, and it gave us some pretty powerful insights. You would have seen some of those when we launched We Mean Business campaign yesterday. It was in the Telegraph, and of course we got a massive amount of media yesterday, and some of the interesting data that came out of that survey around, frighteningly, and we need to hear this on all sides of politics, Daniel, 30% of businesses say unless conditions change, they won't be here under a new government mandate. So that's something we really need to take on board and be accountable for. 43% are telling us that to attract skilled staff, housing availability, let alone affordability, is a massive issue. 26%, of course, are talking about the cost of doing business. And Robbo, that's where I talk to you about, and if you don't know John Robertson, I'm sure all of you would in Western Sydney. He's the chair of iCare, but also a great personal friend of mine, and I value that friendship greatly. But there are challenges there, Robbo, that we've openly spoken about the cost of workers' compensation, the processes, the messiness, if you like, of the injury and management process, the transparency of language that's used within the framework, the processes. I cited my own example, Robbo, that my premiums went up and I haven't never had a claim in my personal business company, never had a claim, and we've got examples of that in the Central Coast. So the solution obviously isn't increasing benefits and downsizing benefits, increasing costs, but it really is about what do we do with these processes and systems, and how do we manage injury, and how do we manage claim. And we're talking about the psychosocial impact that's emerging. And I know Robbo wants to hear this, but Daniel, it'd be something very close to your heart. Should you be successful at the next election, is the whole notion of the fundamentals of Labor Party would be about workers' compensation and how do we best address this issue to ease the pain with small business. Similarly, housing affordability and availability. 43% of our folk are saying we just can't attract skilled labour. I was talking to someone this morning, and I've forgotten who right now, who was telling me, David Borgia, it was you, I think, about a business in Parramatta who actually bought a property to house their staff in because their house couldn't be here. Their staff couldn't afford to live here, so they could live, work and play in their own backyard. The myth of the 30-minute city we often talk about, if you like. And that was an initiative they had there. We've got a great business. I think David, correct me if I'm wrong, was Zepto our business of the year last year?
Zepto,
yeah.
Absolutely.
They were our business here. They were formed in a little garage. In Byron Bay in 2017, and I think last year you transacted about $50 billion across their payment system, which was absolutely extraordinary. But they can't get staff in Byron Bay because of availability and affordability. And you've got one of the greatest emerging businesses in the country. So this is a serious issue, and I spoke to Daniel about this earlier, the whole notion of the housing crisis and the emergence of so many different demographics within that. Our mature age women who have been divorced, widows, stay at home, no super, no real career. We had a classic example just before Christmas when I launched the Confronting the Housing Crisis, and we're talking, a lot of you would recall Tony Bilson and his restaurants and the tragedy that befell his wife when he passed, and they had no super and a lot of debt. And she's now searching desperately for affordable housing of any sort, and has been key, couch surfing and all sorts of things. So, women are escaping domestic family violence and kids, the need for crisis accommodation and so on has never been higher. But it's impacting us in all areas. I think these are critical messages that we need to get across to you, Daniel, and for you to take back to your inner sanctum, so you better understand the impact of this. Is not just a housing crisis. This is a business crisis. This is a knock-on social crisis around increase. What happens in houses where there's financial stress, potential for more domestic violence, mental health issues, suicide, and all those things. So the knock-on effect on both sides of the ledger is very serious and very challenging. So look, anyway, we identified a whole lot of issues. Of course, business don't want to see any more tax, Daniel. Definitely don't want to see any more tax. In fact, we need to be able to operate in an environment of certainty and stability so that we can do what we do best in this state. Payroll tax will always be an issue. Always been an issue. It's at 5.45%, I think, now. We need it under 5, and we need the threshold up to 1.3. We just got to address this. Business is really struggling. Small to medium enterprise is struggling, and it's finding it very hard to get the platform it needs to be the success it needs. And you know as well as I do, without the taxes that flow from business, for a start, the impact it has on government. Skills is a real issue. So whether we're imploring government to look at 100,000 more fee-free, try and say that fast, fee-free apprenticeships, and also another 70,000 fee-free traineeships, so that we can develop our own skills and not be just reliant on overseas skills to come in and fill the labour shortages and the skill shortages we have. And also in areas like our skilled migration visa program, the doubling of that from 15,000 to 30,000 is something we call out for. We think that there's a lot of room for government to look at a venture capital fund for start-up business, and I know Zepto would have appreciated this greatly, but they did it all on their own. So talking about perhaps a $1.3 billion venture capital fund that would stimulate and nurture and allow start-up businesses in the smartest country in the world, probably, and certainly the smartest state in in this country to fast track its productivity and its commitment. We want to see an audit in the first 100 days of our manufacturing capability. You know, manufacturing for too long has been lost in our country and certainly in our state. How do we bring that back to life? And we think the starting point of that, of course, is to understand our capability and our need. And I know there's a lot of work happening. David Borgia, you're there, and with the architect of a lot of the architect of Western Sydney and the corridor and the Aerotropolis corridor, and talking about smart manufacturing and those sort of things. But we need to understand the impact of this. And so we would really encourage that procurement, government procurement. How do we increase SMEs and government procurement to a $10 billion package so that our SMEs can become the beneficiary of the government procurement program? There's a raft of things that I'm sure they'll come up in other areas. But I just wanted to touch on a few of those issues and let you know that we don't shoot from the hip, Daniel. These are surveys from our members, very transparent surveys, and the feedback we're getting is business in this state will suffer in the next 3 or 4 years unless the conditions, are addressed by government, not just from a cost, but from all the other productivity enhancing capabilities the government has, the levers they have to pull. So look, with that, and I may have missed a whole lot of things in my notes, but I don't like reading notes, as people know. So welcome. Have a wonderful morning. It's great to have you here. I feel very privileged, Daniel, for our emerging friendship. I will wish you personally well in the next 51 days. This state, more than ever, needs great political debate, needs great political challenge and great political leadership. And we wish you well in the upcoming campaign. Can I also, and I did forget, and I hate forgetting this, but I've got one of my fellow directors, Judith Field, is here, and I'm not sure if any of the other directors are here. And also I know that Greg, where are you? One of the shadow cabinet members who I can't see at the moment is up there. And Greg, Minister for Local Government, Shadow Minister, might be ahead of my time there, Shadow Minister for Local Government in Western Sydney and Veteran Affairs. So great to have you here and we wish you well. So on behalf of you as a collective, have a great morning. We've got far greater and better speakers than I to come with Daniel Mookhey. Enjoy your time today. Pardon me, today.
Thanks a lot for that fantastic introduction. It is great to start the election year, with such a big event. We've got a few of these on in the next week or so. I think we've got pretty much most of the senior firepower of government and opposition to talk to with our members, so it's great. And just acknowledging again all the members that are here today. It's great to see all of you for a big year. I think we did 50 events in Western Sydney last year, and Paul Nicolette probably did 500, but there's lots on. We appreciate your involvement, your attendance. We're nothing without our members. So thanks very much for all your support and engagement and working together. And I know we have many high-profile members. Barney Glover, the Vice Chancellor of Western Sydney University, who helped sort of build this part of town, particularly in the last decade. It's great to see you here, Barney, and everyone else. Look, by way of introduction, the format for today, we're going to hear from Daniel, the Shadow Treasurer. He's going to talk to us about his vision and plans and ideas. Then I'll do a quick Q&A with Daniel. There should be a chance for some of your questions. If you've got questions, please raise them. Think about them. Don't be shy. There's no stupid questions. Well, there are, but we'll tell you if they are. We want to hear them. And then following that, Dr. Sherman Chan, our Chief Economist, is going to move a vote of thanks. And there's a little video, which I'll step down for in one second. In fact, why don't we watch the video, then I'll come back up and do my intro to Dan.
Hi, I'm Ben Pike from Business New South Wales. For the past 3 days, I've been speaking to enterprises across our great state about some of the issues that are impacting them this election campaign. This is what they said.
I have had some experience with the skilled visas in the past. I have sponsored some hairdressers. Unfortunately, now I want to sponsor beauty therapists, but they're not on the skilled visa list. So that really limits us and limits our growth.
It's really important for the government to prioritise procurement for local businesses, for companies like Nextport, to allow us to adequately plan both our facilities and our staffing levels for the future.
Septo started in 2017 as 4 guys in a garage in Byron Bay with a huge idea and passion and desire to fix payments and bank account payments in particular. We've now grown today to processing $50 billion worth of payments. So a venture capital program that would be investing in New South Wales startups could really help others kind of have similar success stories to some of those big tech giants that we've seen.
So payroll tax is a real disincentive to hire new staff. When we're looking at whether a role can be fulfilled through automation or through hiring a new employee, certainly that additional overhead is a factor. We'd like to employ more people. It's much more fun working with people than robots, but certainly the more we look at it, the more payroll is a factor in our decision making.
If the government were to expand the number of TAFE places in New South Wales, I expect to see a much higher quality of carpenters, electricians or tradesmen in general.
Higher taxes would impact us greatly. It would mean that we wouldn't be able to grow as quickly as we want or as much as we want, and I really wouldn't want to have to choose between paying taxes and hiring new staff.
Increasing the housing supply across the state, particularly in our area, if I could look at our own backyard, would be amazing. But across all breweries, they're all facing the same squeeze. The rental squeeze is real and it's affecting business.
New South Wales Government turned to AMP control in the COVID crisis, and we developed a ventilator and had it working in under 18 days for intensive care units. We can pivot very quickly to support New South Wales manufacturing needs. New South Wales Government, back New South Wales manufacturers, set up the ecosystem and get out of our way.
So, you've heard from businesses. Now over to you.
We mean business in New South Wales.
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 And we mean business in New South Wales.
And thanks to Ben and the team for pulling that together, that communication. Look, just a quick introduction to Daniel Mookhey, the Shadow Treasurer. And before I do that, just also acknowledging we've got some other Shadow Ministers in the room today. I think Julia Finn, the Shadow Minister for Sport, is here. And Steve Camper, who's the Shadow Minister for Small Business and other things. We'll get you along as a speaker, possibly as a Minister. So Steve, great to see you again as well. And Tara Moriarty. Hey, Tara, great to see you here as well. Sorry. And John Robertson's here as well, which is great. So look, just a few points about Daniel Mookhey. You probably know Daniel. I mean, it's a high-profile position being an opposition treasurer in New South Wales. You may know him from watching government estimates, although probably only nerds actually watch the whole estimates like us. But you probably see him occasionally on the nightly news, sometimes getting a scalp. But I think what's interesting, the chamber is very apolitical, but what's interesting about... Why are you laughing? It's true. We've got Dominic Perrottet tomorrow, the Premier. What I think is interesting about Daniel is, politics is an ugly business in some ways. It can be. Particularly in New South Wales, it can be a blood sport in the bear pit, as we all know. It can be very, very challenging on a personal level, and some people really go the person. But there are pollies, I think, that are respected on both sides because they try and talk about issues and ideas, and when they have an issue or an idea, it's about the issue and idea and not the person, and they get relationships and respect from all sides. And I think Daniel Mookhey is actually one of those people. I think there's a number on the government front bench as well. Well-regarded, thoughtful. Certainly, I think that there's an element of respect, Daniel, for you and what you're able to bring. He's also incredibly accessible, which is good for open, transparent government, and certainly the broader movement, I guess, of businesses that are wanting to engage with government over regulation and things that are inefficient to try and move the state forward, create employment. We've certainly found you very accessible. I know our CEO, Daniel Hunter, has. You've addressed our state council with Lyle, the board. You've been really accessible to myself in Western Sydney and our members, to Paul Nicolau in Sydney, to Bob Hawes in the Hunter and St Adams Arth and the Illawarra into the region. So you've been really accessible, which is terrific. You're always available to listen to a great idea or a silly one, which is good. And I've got to say, you are a qualified person. You've got degrees in business and defence and law, which is fantastic. But to me, I think the thing that I know you most for is actually the fact that you're in a senior position and you're actually a local. So you were the son of first-generation migrants from India. You were born in Blacktown Hospital. You grew up in Marylands. You went to local schools here, and I think you get, where you come from shapes what you stand for and what you're going to do. And so we certainly in Western Sydney have felt over many years sometimes that governments haven't adequately looked at the challenges of shifting the needle on jobs and closing the jobs gap and providing the public transport. So we've got great expectations, Daniel, if you are successful. We don't know how you're going to go. So, Daniel, thank you very much for coming today. I did want to say something humorous. Humour's not really my game. Loads of laugh there, okay. And I did want to talk to Steve Camper to see if he has any dirt on you, but I didn't get a chance to bump into Steve. So I don't have much to say there, other than to say that you've really gone for the low risk option today with your white shirt. Daniel has the most florid shirt display in New South Wales Parliament, and we haven't seen any of the colour today. So next time you come back, we want to see lots of colour, mate. So whether it's in your glasses or in your shirts. In April, yeah. So thanks for all you do. We look forward to continuing to work with you for the whole state and for Western Sydney and all the businesses. And please welcome Daniel Mookhey.
Good morning and thank you all to the business leaders assembled here today who are striving towards a better and more prosperous future for our state and for our nation. We are gathered on the land of the Darug people. And so let me begin by paying my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and allow me also to pledge my allyship to First Nations people as we decide this year as Australians whether we will take the next step forward in perfecting our democracy and whether we will enshrine in our constitution a voice for Indigenous Australians, as well as beginning the hard work of treaty making here in New South Wales. President Gorman, my good friend David Borger, my good friend Paul Nicolau, my parliamentary colleagues, former Labor leader John Robertson, Western Sydney University Vice-Chancellor Bunny Glover, members of Business New South Wales. In 51 days' time, in the scout halls, in the church halls, in the town halls of our state, we shall collectively decide who will carry the responsibility of leading New South Wales for the next 4 years. And I wanted to let you in on a secret. Having thought deeply about this issue and about the choice we face, having carefully weighed the options in front of us, I've decided to vote for Chris Minns and the New South Wales Labor team. I am using my vote to give New South Wales a fresh start, to elect a team that will use the levers of government to make a meaningful change for the hardworking people of New South Wales. We in Labor are campaigning at this election to re-establish the universal right to housing and home ownership for all, to repair our schools and hospitals so they again lead the nation, and to reimagine our economy so it rewards the risk takers, the innovators and the hard workers, no matter whether you own a business or whether you work for one. This is an election about what is possible in New South Wales for the next 4 years, but also for the next 3 years to come, the 5 years after that, and 10 years from now. So at a time in New South Wales when people are clamouring for the return of a united government with integrity, who have just cause to question whether or not this 12-year-old government's best days are ahead of it, who have reason to wonder whether our current Premier, and my friend, even has the power to name a cabinet, I've come before you here to tell you about the fresh start plan we have for New South Wales and to explain the economic priorities of a Minns Labor government. Friends, the next state government will govern amidst the sharpest climb in the cost of living New South Wales has experienced in a generation. More than a decade of real wage gains have been lost. The purchasing power of $1 today is the same as it was in 2009. And too many businesses are suffering from this inflationary outbreak as well. Business New South Wales released a report yesterday and it was impactful. It canvassed the trepidations of small businesses are feeling as their costs rise, as their margins are squeezed, as they contend with unreliable supply chains and suffer from the dearth of skilled labour. President Gorman, your report was a salient reminder of the severe risk inflation poses to the long-term health of the New South Wales economy. It cannot be allowed to fester, so we will confront it. The initial mission of an incoming New South Wales Labor economic team is simple: fight inflation first. We will start by living within our means. We intend to manage the budget responsibly. There will be no reckless spending from us. We are not planning to win this election by spending money New South Wales taxpayers don't have on promises no one believes any government can keep. We are and we will continue to make the tough decisions necessary to have the money we need to deliver the changes New South Wales must make. We've been doing so until this point. We will do so until election day and beyond. Sound budget management is the first prong of our economic strategy. But the next step is to invest further in the resource that is the long-term driver of our prosperity, and that is our people, their skills and their ingenuity. Let there be no doubt, our state makes its living by selling the intelligence of our citizens to the world. No nation in our near neighbourhood, nor state in our federation, rivals our power to provide the Asia-Pacific, Europe and the Americas with world-class services staffed by the best taught workers. Education has always been our secret economic superpower. It's how we acquire the world-beating skills that we then use to unlock the magic circle of productivity growth that leads to investment growth that lifts real wages as our national income climbs. Yet this truth is increasingly self-evident. The power of our education system is fading. Here are some facts that have alarmed me, that have alarmed Chris, and that should alarm you too. The most recent NAPLAN results show that 12,500 kids in Year 9 are not able to write to a minimum standard. There are 9,000 Year 9 children not reading to a minimum standard. Between 2006 and 2018, New South Wales students dropped from being the 6th best readers in the OECD to the 23rd. We dropped from being the 9th to the 31st in maths, and we dropped from being the 3rd to the 23rd in science. So I'm clear. Falling education standards today is a recipe for economic decline tomorrow. And no long-term economic plan is worth its salt unless it truthfully reckons with the decade of declining education standards New South Wales has just endured. So, Chris Minns and the New South Wales Labor team will act. We intend to secure the future of our economy by confronting the crisis in our education system. We'll make difficult decisions to make New South Wales the first state to fully fund its public schools to the levels which are necessary for every child to thrive. We will be making 10,000 casual teachers permanent, and we will free teachers from the time-wasting administrative tasks that are not making any difference to a child's learning. We intend to pair this investment in the capability of our future workforce with a strong commitment to domestic manufacturing. As your members have said, New South Wales needs to become a state that makes things again. Consider this. Queensland has gained 6,000 manufacturing jobs since 2011. New South Wales has lost 42,000 of them. COVID, as well as Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, show how nations without onshore manufacturing capacity are far more prone to supply shocks than their competitors who have that resource. That's why our trading partners, nations like the United States, Europe, Japan and South Korea are racing to rebuild and strengthen their manufacturing capabilities. New South Wales Labor is determined to make sure our state doesn't fall behind. We want to rebuild our state's manufacturing capacity, and we have a plan to do it. We will set a target of 50% minimum local content for future transport rolling stock contracts. Tender weightings for local content, job creations for small business and ethical supply chains will be increased in government procurement to 30%. A New South Wales Jobs First Commission, an independent expert body, will be established to oversee the implementation and growth of these local industries, and its first job will be to audit our current domestic manufacturing capabilities as well. We will work collaboratively with industry to make the state's government's own demand pipeline for major infrastructure and manufactured goods as transparent as possible and as easy as possible for local suppliers to understand so they can make their investment decisions. This pipeline will include the procurement of the next set of trains to replace the ageing Tangaras, creating 1,000 jobs during the design and build phase, and many, many more in the ongoing maintenance. It has taken Victoria 7 years to implement these policies, but in the time since they've commenced that work, they've created 40,000 local jobs as a direct result of adopting procurement policies like this. We aren't promising, and we cannot rebuild an entire sector overnight, but we have to start somewhere. Fighting inflation, repairing our education system and rebuilding domestic manufacturing, these are big challenges, and we've made them before. But indeed, the genius of our state is that we always remake ourselves after times of economic adversity. The next 4 years are an opportunity to transform again, to correct the errors of the past 12 years, which are now a threat to our prosperity in the coming decade. We have more work to do. We need to have an energy system that is stable enough, cheap enough, and predictable enough for businesses to make long-term investments, but is clean enough to help stave off the horrors of global heating. We cannot do without a vocational education system that is responsive to the needs of industry and affordable enough for working people to attend, so the skilled labour we need and that businesses are crying out for is developed onshore, working in tandem with a managed migration scheme which welcomes those who come across the sea for whom we have our boundless plains to share. We do need to have a workers' compensation system which is not in a constant state of turmoils, with premiums rising, return to work rates falling, the surplus disappearing, but executive pay forever climbing regardless of performance. The next election will be won by the party with a plan to meet these challenges and the team to deliver it. Now, we in New South Wales Labor relish the contest to come. Between now and polling day, we will be launching even more policies as we go about seeking a mandate for change as well. Tomorrow, my friend, the Premier, will be addressing you too. And I'm sure he's bound to mention, as he should, his long-term economic plan. Now, let me warn you. This is a phrase which is carefully crafted in Liberal Party focus groups. It's been uttered word for word by Tony Abbott, Malcolm Turnbull, Scott Morrison, as their fear grew about losing power. It's so cliched that even Matthew Guy got in on the act during the recent Victorian election. But I am willing to give the Premier the benefit of the doubt. I am prepared to accept that he is sincere. He just needs to meet a very simple test. Explain why a 12-year-old government needs more time to deliver a long-term economic plan, especially when his cabinet is not sticking around to deliver it. The Premier is free to spend the rest of the campaign talking about his long-term economic plan, and we relish the debate to come. But it is a policy without a point, because in the short term, all his best ministers are walking out the door. Let me leave you with these closing remarks. As David mentioned, I grew up nearby in Merrylands, in Julia Finn's electorate. Most of my neighbours worked in the factories, estuaries, quarries and refineries of wider Western Sydney. Today, the people in my old neighbourhood have very different jobs. But despite their trades and occupations having changed, their ambitions and aspirations have stayed the same. Like everyone else, they expect their hard work to be rewarded with greater wealth. They expect honest businesses to make good profits, and they extend the hand of friendship to those in need of assistance. We are seeking to form a government on their behalf, and on behalf of all the people and businesses across this state who are eager for an energetic government led by a united team with a vision for what this state can become. So let this race continue. May the people decide, and thank you all for joining me for breakfast this morning.
Thanks, Daniel. Obviously, ate your breakfast at the table there. Lots of energy, which is fantastic. We've got a few questions, and we're going to go to the floor. And I just wanted to, I might actually just start with, you mentioned, boundless plains to share. That we're opening our arms to these people, but not all of Sydney actually is opening their boundless plains to share. There are many neighbourhoods and suburbs that are close to great jobs. That have kind of said no to housing constantly, continuously. Just on the housing front, I mean, affordability, as Lyle mentioned, is appalling. In the past, I think affordability was an issue for planning ministers and housing ministers, but now it's probably an issue for treasurers because it's affecting economic productivity. So what can you do that's going to be different in the area of housing supply?
Simple. We have to have more supply, and we have to orientate our strategy towards creating more supply. In the Greater Sydney Basin, we used to, as of recently as 2015, produce 42,000 new dwellings per year. We're now down to 24,000. that results in about a 12% increase in prices over the long term. We have to build more supply. And that also means creating the legitimacy and the social legitimacy around more supply, which is why we've said we'll lead in this respect. We will set aside surplus government land and insist that 30% of the housing that's built on top of it is set aside for social, affordable and diverse use. We've made it clear that we would ask the Greater Cities Commission to rebalance the housing growth targets, so we're putting more near major transport infrastructure so we can bring more of that supply online without having to wait, for example, for Sydney Water to get around to putting the plumbing in. Big changes. We've also said that we will be tasking Landcom, the government developer, with launching the first government-owned build-to-rent schemes in the bush. And we shouldn't forget it's a huge crisis in regional New South Wales with a massive issue to do with rent. And we've proposed a comprehensive strategy to overhaul and modernise rent standards and protections for people too.
Yeah, I mean, that's an impressive list. I think they're all good things that would generally be supported by businesses and members. Although, even if the Greater Cities Commission can rebalance, you still come down to the whole issue of rezonings, which can take sort of a decade sometimes to do. So, I mean, we went recently to New Zealand and we saw the Labor Party and the Conservative opposition both joined together and voted through legislation to essentially mass rezone major cities for not for high rise, but for medium density housing. So I'm just wondering if you've seen that.
Yeah, well, we have actually. Grant Robertson, who is now, I think, the former Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand, was telling us about what happened in Auckland as a good example of how you can make change fast in cities like that. So we're going to learn from their model. It is remiss of me, particularly as a shadow treasurer, not to tell you about the fact that I'm looking to simplify the amount of agencies that are involved in these decision making here as well. Anyone who is trying to build housing here, which I'm sure people in this room know, that if you want to do it somewhere in Parramatta, for example, you'll be dealing, depending on the size of what you want to build, you'll be dealing with the Planning Department, you'll be dealing with the Greater Cities Commission, you'll be dealing with the Council, you'll be dealing with Sydney Water, you'll be dealing as well with probably Western Sydney parklands as well, and this is just too complicated. And we are going to have to simplify on the government side the agency situation here so it is faster in terms of decision making, whether it's good or bad. As well. But right now, no one is satisfied with how speedy the decision-making is. If you want to build a house, it's too slow. If you don't want a house built, it's too slow.
That's great. I think Treasury leading this process would be good, actually. I just want to talk about business confidence and business conditions. I know we do a lot of surveys, the business condition surveys. The last couple of years, businesses really did rely on governments bailing out and helping them going through those very difficult times. And I think businesses are so really appreciative of the fact that Australian government, state and federal in particular, did that. But costs are rising, as you mentioned. Our latest survey showing 82% of businesses think pollies aren't acting fast enough. 27% think that unless things change, they'll actually be out of business. There'll be an exit from the business scene. So I guess knowing that we've got these challenges in energy, insurance, and supply side costs, what are the levers that you can pull if you are treasurer in 53 days?
Yeah, there's three big ones. We have to do more in our energy markets, and we're going to have something to say, some pretty bold announcements to do with that very, very shortly as well. But we can't allow power prices in New South Wales to rise by 26%, which is what's happened in the last 6 months. Same time, incidentally, Queensland power prices didn't go up, even though we're all buying power from the same electricity market. Not a popular view in this room, but that's got a lot to do with the fact that we sold off public assets, and that didn't happen in Queensland as well. But we will have a lot more to say very shortly about what we're doing in respect to energy. Second thing we absolutely have to do is with respect to my good friend John Robertson, we have to get premiums under control in New South Wales as well, and we have to start the hard work of repairing the workers' compensation system. I am worried that premiums are set to rise by 40% in workers' comp for 326,000 businesses by the end of this decade as a result of the difficulties that have emerged in the New South Wales workers' compensation system. That's a big, big issue. And you are dead right when you say skills and vocational education. As this campaign goes on, we're going to have a lot more as well to say about that, and you've got to give us some time because we are politicians in an election campaign. We've got to stagger our announcements, but you've got to be clear as well when it comes to skills. We've had, I think, by my count, 5 managing directors of TAFE in the last 5 years. You can't have a staple vocational education system if the person in charge of it isn't around for more than 12 months.
Good point. We might actually go to the floor now. I've got a few more here, but I know Bob Hawes wanted to ask a question. We'll come back in one sec, Charles. Bob, that wasn't rehearsed, was it? Bob Hawes, CEO of...
Thanks, David. Thank you, Daniel. You've already mentioned the issue around sovereignty in manufacturing, and it is something that obviously resonates in this room greatly. We've got a big challenge, though. As you recognise, we've lost a lot of businesses that have been forced to close as governments in two ways. Firstly, their own procurement, and secondly, the way that they compete or to attract business to the state. Firstly, I'm really keen to hear more about the detail of how the government, your government, if you're elected, would convert that procurement opportunity for local businesses on the basis that Treasury in New South Wales has consistently gone just straight to price, and unlike Victoria and South Australia, has refused to put in the models the long chain impact of multiplier effects of actually producing things here rather than bringing them on a boat or a plane and importing them. And secondly, we've got a lousy record for bidding for new business or new industry into the state. And as you would be aware, in the new energy economy at the moment particularly, we import a hell of a lot of things like solar panels and components for wind. There's opportunity here to manufacture that in New South Wales, but we're losing bids against Victoria and New South Wales and Queensland, in that process. I'm keen to hear how you believe your government might address that as well. Thank you.
Well, let me start with your last question first. It is fair to say that we are having troubles rolling out our investment attraction strategy, and particularly our ability to get foreign investors into New South Wales, and that's got to do with some of the difficulties that have been associated with the rollout of the Trade Commissioner's roles, which I will not go too much into detail about. But we have to look at those strategies, and we've got to see how they can be refined and repaired to ensure that we are competing for businesses to come here to New South Wales. We can't just rely on our harbour as well as in Newcastle or in Sydney in that respect, which is why we are making such an investment in education, because ultimately what has always worked in terms of attracting people to this state, what's always been our comparative advantage, is that we offer businesses proximity to the smartest people. And we need to do more of that. That's a big part of our long-term reform in order to meet that challenge. In the short term, when it comes to that, you are dead right. We should be using the example that we set ourselves as a government. New South Wales government is the biggest purchaser of goods and services in the country. We should be using it to set local content requirements, which is what we are wanting to do. You're dead right to say that there has been resistance in that from the Treasury. So I put the Treasury on warning, and in 52 days' time, I'm going to have some interesting conversations with them.
We just covered, I think, procurement, which was one of my questions, but I wanted to ask about, the potential for New South Wales to become a startup state. The policy that's been launched by David Harding and Lyle and the Chamber calls for the establishment of a government-backed venture capital fund. We went to a number of Western Sydney members, went with the Australia-Israel Chamber, and I know Michelle Bloom's in the audience today, to look at how Israel's been doing venture capital and startup companies. There's a similar fund in Victoria. We think that we could do more here, and I think you've been briefed on that. Do you have any comments about that?
Yeah, we do. And we are looking very closely at Business New South Wales' suggestion here. And we notice that Victoria has indeed launched a $2.7 billion fund, I think it is about that amount, as well, which is stealing the march on us, particularly in biomedical research. And that is causing a lot of biomedical research to drift down to Melbourne. So this is something that we are going to look to do. This is something which isn't going to be easy, I'm not going to pretend, because we are going to have to think hard about how we consolidate a lot of what we already do into a much more effective structure. So we're open for a very good conversation with you about that, and we are open to working in a bipartisan way with the government to make sure that this is something that we can create here in New South Wales that can work over the long term, because venture capital requires patient capital, and that's what which requires political bipartisanship if that's what we're going to be doing in New South Wales.
I think that's great, and that's one of the things that we actually noted, and Michelle often referred to the fact that there were lots of differences of opinion on political issues in Israel, but venture capital was not one of them. It was actually something that was above politics, which is great. I've got a question or two from over here. Am I grab one of them? Yes, Laurie.
Thank you so much. You mentioned the demise of the education system, which is something we are very passionate about. I represent the peak body for outdoor education, and I'm seeing private schools thrive by putting outdoor education embedded in their systems, and public schools are continuing to fall. Mobile phones are prevalent in every classroom in public schools. The social media impacts have got mental health at an all-time low. How are you looking at how we can embed more outdoor education, get kids more engaged with the world as opposed to social media, and start lifting their game and bringing them into skilled jobs?
So yesterday we announced we're establishing a $400 million education future fund, which is there to make sure we become the first state to fully fund every public school to the standard experts say are necessary for every kid to thrive. We will do that 2 years earlier than what the government is proposing to do, and we will be going to the Commonwealth saying, now that we've come to the table, we'd like you to come to the table too. You make a very good point about standards in our schools and as well as the mental health issues that are confronting our children as well. I have a 7-year-old who started year 2 yesterday, and he asked me for a phone on Monday. It's scary. He didn't get it, by the way. But it's sort of, we are banning mobile phones in schools. We are doing that as an order of priority because fundamentally it creates better learning and better mental health outcomes.
Interesting. The question from Charles, and I'll come back to you, Lance. Charles Casaselli.
I represent the Western Sydney Regional Organisation of Councils. Daniel, over the past decade or so, depending on who you ask, the performance of the New South Wales bureaucracy varies from abysmal to okay. Very rarely do we get an outstanding or exceptional. And we see lots of issues, especially since the notion of super clustering of government agencies into these super clustered agencies, where you have one departmental secretary reporting to 3 or 4, in some cases even more ministers, depending on issues. Does the government have any plans to have a look at whether the original outcomes were sort of that we wanted to get from clustering of these agencies have actually achieved anything, or do we actually have the same problems we had before? The only difference is instead of having silos at the agency borders, you now have them within super clusters of agencies.
It's a very good question you ask, and in order for Labor to deliver the changes we want to be partnering with a world-class public service where the public service is respected, and we do respect the work that public servants do in this state across New South Wales. We do note, though, that since the formation of the super clusters, which for aficionados of government administration is the formation of 8, now 9 departments, that have 9 secretaries that cluster all the agencies. We can't help but notice it's been accompanied by a lot of growth in the number of people who are sitting at the top of those clusters, and it's not necessarily clear that the value for money is coming from that there. In the last 4 years, for example, I think we've gone from having 2,900 SES members to I think we're at 3,500 as well. And look, we're going to be asking some pretty tough questions about whether or not we are getting the value that we should be getting for that investment, but also whether we can invest that money elsewhere. To deliver good change, to turn around an education system, to deliver long-term economic growth, we need a world-class public service, and that's what we're looking to build.
Got to maybe one question. I've got one from Lance.
Lance Shear, Liverpool Innovation Precinct. First, thanks, Daniel, for coming out. Good to see you again. Sure will go well for you and Chris in March. There's a number of state-significant transformative projects you'll inherit. One of those in particular is the Aerotropolis or Bradfield, and it relates to many of the things you've mentioned this morning: startups, manufacturing, education, number of agencies involved. The narrative around that to date has gone a particular way. Do your conversations have any different views or different approaches to how the Aerotropolis or even Tech Central will be developed and what their intentions will be?
Well, we want the Aerotropolis to succeed. It is a project that has had bipartisan support. It's dear to the heart of all of us in both sides of politics, to be fair, but it's also dear to the heart of the current Prime Minister as well, who's a big champion of it too. So we are concerned about whether it's rolling out at the timescale that it should be. We are concerned about whether or not it's working as closely with the surrounding local councils as they should be too. And we also have concerns about whether or not the transport infrastructure that the Aerotropolis needs to thrive will arrive in time as well. We'll have a bit more to say about that, especially the transport dimensions of the Aerotropolis a bit later in the campaign as we go on. But so we are reserving our right to do a better job is effectively the way I would put it in respect to the Aerotropolis, and much the same with Tech Central.
Great, thank you.
Barney, this might be the last question, I think, before we wrap up.
Thanks, Daniel. Really did appreciate your presentation. You mentioned education a number of times. I think everyone in the room would applaud you for that. One of the interesting initiatives of the current government has been to bring vocational training and higher education closer together to address the skills shortage, to recognise we need to get people coming out of programs quicker with the skills they need to work in industry. One of those initiatives is the Institutes for Applied Technology, bringing vocational training and universities together, construction innovation at Penrith and digital technology at Meadowbank. I'm interested in your view of vocational training and higher education coming together. There are great opportunities in Western Sydney for greater co-location and development of vocational training facilities with higher education. I wonder what your policy position will be on it.
Enthusiastically in favour. We enthusiastically favour the blended models, and we applaud your university for leading a lot of the work around it as well. And we would actually like to have secondary education looked into it at the appropriate time too. And equally, that's part of the reasons why we're pretty eager to stabilise the vocational education side of that equation, so we can begin to commence these, the implementation of these long-term strategies.
If I could just parochially squeeze one more in, just another Western Sydney one, Daniel. Just on the issue of the tourism industry, visiting friends and relatives and so on, we have been, I guess, concerned that Destination New South Wales doesn't fund many sort of events in Western Sydney. I think there were questions asked and estimates this year. There was something like less than 1 million went to the Parkland City, I think about 1.5 to the Central City, and there was about sort of 80 to 120 million in the Eastern City. Is there anything that you can do about that, particularly in the context of an airport opening in 3.5 years and the fact that we don't have any visitor economy strategy for that airport?
Well, I feel I'm going to have to look into this now. And, yes, but you've raised it before, David, and you've spoken to us about as well the equitable distribution of these funding, particularly to pair with the establishment of new cultural institutions in Western Sydney. And yes, we do need to do that.
Fantastic. I think we've widened your portfolio choice from Treasury to education to tourism to the arts, so really appreciate that. Can I ask if you could stay here? And I wanted to ask Dr. Sherman Chan, our Chief Economist, if she could move the vote of thanks. You do that from there or here, wherever you prefer.
Thank you, David. Well, good morning, everyone. Well, first of all, I just want to thank Mr. Daniel Mookhey for his valuable time and insights today. In particular, thank you for sharing your voting intentions with us. Your secret is safe with us. So having the Chief Economist on stage at this point of the event, I'm sure a lot of you are expecting a bit of an appraisal on what we've heard this morning. But before I do that, I actually want to share some of the insights that the team at Business New South Wales has gathered in recent months with regards to business conditions. So as the leading body for businesses in New South Wales, we have a strong evidence base, as Lyle referred to in his opening speech. And I think by now, most of you would have already heard about our Business Condition Survey, which is our flagship research product. Every quarter, we hear from businesses of all sizes, from sole traders and SMEs through to large corporates. And we listen to businesses from all regions of New South Wales and also all industry sectors. And this is simply reflective of us, Business New South Wales. We care about every business in the state. So about 3 surveys ago, we introduced an open-ended question. We asked businesses if there's one thing the New South Wales government can do to make it easier for you to do business, what would that be? Well, initially, the responses were very orderly, I have to say. We asked them to nominate one thing and they'd give you that one thing. But in more recent surveys, we are seeing a long list of multiple items. So people are struggling to come down to one critical solution that they want. What they want is actually a suite of solutions. And in preparing my address today, I was actually contemplating whether to tell you guys this, but I wasn't sure how formal this event's going to be. But judging by David Borges' introduction of Mr. Mookhey, I think I can tell you this. What we have assured our members is that whatever you tell us in the survey, we read every single comment that comes through. I personally read every single one of them. And what I've noticed, as I mentioned, is that initially when we asked that question, the responses were all very orderly. But in recent times, there has been an increase in swear words. And in the latest ones, those swear words are written in uppercase as well. So we are sensing the frustration of businesses. And of course, there are a lot of responses that actually show us like how helpless they actually feel at this point in time. And some of them are just basically sounding very desperate. So this is something that we do want to acknowledge. And Business New South Wales is just basically proud to represent the New South Wales business community and to put forward to government the collective voice of our members. And therefore, we have the 5 policy pillars as part of our election campaign. And I'm sure all of you would have got the booklets on the table. And I'm glad to note that Mr. Mookhey today was spot on in highlighting some of the key challenges facing the business community. And here I just want to highlight a few examples here. Well, first of all, with the Fresh Start Plan, is that a formal name, the Fresh Start Plan, or you just coined it on stage? No. It's formal? You were probably going to hear about it a lot. Okay, right, okay. So with the Fresh Start Plan, the first thing that he pointed out was the rising cost of living. So not only did he acknowledge that inflation affects households, I think it's also important to acknowledge that inflation actually hurts businesses as well, in particular small businesses. And the second point he made that I want to highlight is his commitment to managing the budget in a prudent manner while not losing sight of important long-term investment in education and skills development. So from our perspective, this is very, very critical because investment in education and skills development actually leads to longer-term productivity growth. So despite challenges that we are facing now, we should actually keep our focus on education and skills development. And the third thing that stood out to me was his commitment to reducing bureaucracy, because from our survey, we've heard repeatedly from businesses about their frustration in dealing with government agencies. Sometimes they don't know where to start. Sometimes they give up midway because it's just too complicated and too frustrating, and they never lead to the intended outcomes that they want to achieve. So on that note, it's great that Mr. Mookhey is aware of that. And now the last point that I want to highlight is about his commitment to rebuild our state's manufacturing sector. And he even promised to do an audit of domestic manufacturing capability. So for that, Business New South Wales gives you a gold star. So you've obviously read our pamphlet. That's one of the key recommendations that we are putting forward as part of our election campaign. So very well done, Mr. Mookhey. Look, this is a great start. This is a great start. But we look forward to hearing more from you, Mr. Mookhey, and your colleagues over the next 2 months on other important matters. So one thing that you touched on was energy policy. So our businesses are very, very keen to hear what your policy would be that can help to keep energy prices in check. And the next thing is about housing supply. Thank you for acknowledging that. And we just want to also reiterate the point that it's not just an increase in quantity. We want housing that is actually close to places of work as well, which is important because that is something that businesses are complaining all across the state. And last but not least, we would like to hear more about any intentions you have in tax reforms, for example, payroll tax, and also identifying other government fees and charges that can potentially be reduced because that's going to really help with the cost of doing business in our state. So our We Mean Business campaign will continue to tell the stories of our members throughout this election period. And the next business conditions survey will be launched this afternoon. Later this month, we will be sharing the results with you, which will no doubt provide further insights into the needs that businesses have identified. And we hope that all sides of politics will focus on the voice of our business community. Finally, I just want to again point out that a strong state policy platform will provide the certainty and stability that businesses need in order to invest and grow and to also ensure New South Wales remains the best place for people to live and work. And at Business New South Wales, we do mean business. I thank you once again for joining us this morning. Please enjoy the rest of your morning.